Yo, what's up, everyone? This is Terry again, bringing you my Week 3 preview for Ohio State versus Western Kentucky. So, a couple things happened. The players met with the media. Um, I went in and dove into some stats for Western Kentucky and what we can expect to see this weekend. And then I got some hot takes for you guys towards the end of the show, so stick around for that. So, let's go ahead and get started here. Obviously, I said the players met with the media. One of the players that I thought had the most to say, or like some of the most interesting things to say, was Emeka Egbuka. He was talking about Kyle McCord, and he said that Kyle McCord is the last one to leave the facility every day. He said he's a student of the game. He spends tons of time getting extra reps in and getting extra film time in. So, I mean, I love that from him. You know, I'm not completely sold yet on Kyle McCord, but if he's going to become the great player that I think he has the potential to be, that's what it's going to take. And I'm glad to hear that he's doing that stuff. Now, Emeka Egbuka did say that Kyle McCord is not a scrambler, which I think we all knew that. But hearing a wide receiver say that on the team is interesting. So I think we shouldn't expect to see him scrambling much, although we did see him have a decent run in the Indiana game. So I think that he has it in him, especially when it needs to be done. So we'll see how that works out. And then another thing that Emeka Egbuka said that was interesting was he talked about practice and how practice didn't allow them a ton of reps with either quarterback. Now I know this year in like training camp, Ryan Day was doing something where they were splitting fields, which they brought in Joe Philbin from the NFL, and I think that was the thing that he brought with him. So they had like basically two full fields running at the same time. But I just thought that was interesting that Emeka said we never really had a ton of reps with either quarterback to get comfortable with either one of them, and obviously that disrupts timing and things like that. So we'll see how that works out now that it should be Kyle McCord getting most of the reps with the ones, and hopefully they'll be more in sync with that being the case. A couple other things that players had to say, nothing super crazy, but Tommy Eichenberg was asked about Steel Chambers. He said he knows the defense in and out, and he always knows what the offense is doing. So that, obviously Steel Chambers is not a bad player. A lot of people have wanted to see CJ Hicks play, and I'm one of those people, and I still do because I think he has a higher ceiling. But Steele has never, I don't necessarily think that Steele is going to lose this game. I don't see him making a ton of crazy plays to help us win a game either. But again, if the defense is a whole unit and they're all playing together, I think they'll be just fine. So let's move on here. G. Scott, he met with the media too. I mean, listen, I didn't necessarily pick anything specific that this kid had to say, but I love G. Scott. I love when he speaks with the media. He's such a well-spoken, well-thought about everything that he says. And again, I mean, I love that from this kid. Um, as I said before on my other show, his dad told him he should transfer because he wasn't playing here. He was trying to become a tight end. He wasn't playing. And he told his dad, like, look, I'm not going nowhere. The reason I'm not playing is because of me, not because of Ohio State. So, again, I think that's a good type of player to have on your team. And I think he's been the best tight end on the team this year. So, I mean, I expect to see him getting tight end one reps, and because he seems like the best blocker. Obviously, he's a threat in the pass game because he was a receiver prior to becoming a tight end. The other player that met with the media was Jordan Hancock. The biggest thing I took away from his interview with the media was that he's super excited to be playing nickel, which I think is good because he has that big physical body, and we've actually seen him not be afraid to stick his nose in the run game. So I think having Jordan Hancock at that nickel is going to be huge for this defense this year. A couple of the coaches also met with the media. The one that I think had the most to say, or like the most interesting things to say, was Justin Fry, the offensive line coach. So it seemed like his theme and his basically kind of what he was talking to his guys about the most this week was violence and aggression. And I love hearing that from him, and I want to see that from the offensive line. I mean, overall, I think we have seen it from them, but I think they can always get better at that. And if that's what he's going to preach to them, that's what I expect to see this weekend. And Justin Fry, his demeanor is just, I don't know. I like everything about him too. He's just one of them guys who you could tell that he'd be fun to play for, but he's not going to take any shit. He's going to get after you if you mess up, and he's going to make you get it right. But he did talk about Josh Simmons, about the hands to the face penalty that Josh Simmons had. he said there was like 2 plays later where his hands started to creep up again, and he put his hip on the guy and adjusted his hands down and fixed the issue. So, and I think that's what we've been seeing from Josh Simmons this whole year. I think he's raw and he's making mistakes and he's learning from them. So much of the people that I like to talk about Ohio State football with, we constantly talk about like, hey, guys have to get reps so they can learn, so they can get better, and we don't apply that to everybody, and we really should. Like Josh Simmons is one of the guys who, he's you can basically count him as a freshman if you talk about in terms of playing left tackle. So I think that he's getting better every time he steps on the field, and Justin Fry seems to be seeing that also. And then the last coach that spoke with the media was Tim Walton. Um, he didn't have a ton of interesting things to say. He's kind of like very consistent when he talks, and he has high expectations for his guys. But I think that the Tim Walton hire from Ryan Day is going to end up being a banger hire where we're going to have a great cornerback room for years to come, because we have a good cornerback room now from what we've seen so far. We have guys in the waiting like Jermaine Matthews, Calvin Simpson-Hunt, Lorenzo Styles, and then guys who are currently committed to Ohio State like Aaron Scott and Bryce West, who are 2 guys from Ohio, but they both look like really good players. So I think Tim Walton's going to have this room rocking for a long time. BIA is back, in my opinion. So, but when Tim Walton was talking about players, that he had a lot of high praise for Jordan Hancock, which I can see why. Jordan Hancock has kind of just done what he's been asked to do. He's switched over to that nickel role so that Davis Nickmanosin can be the outside corner. And I mean, I haven't seen him make too many mistakes or anything like that. And I think that he's pretty good in coverage. So, I see what Tim Walton sees there. And then the one thing that he talked about that I thought was interesting, he kind of emphasized it, is that this week with the matchup against Western Kentucky, who is going to be throwing the ball a lot, they're going to be running a lot of screens and things like that to set up passes down the field. He said that's part of their run game. And so basically what that means is that my corners, my DBs, they have to be able to tackle and be ready to tackle on every single play, because the run game's coming at you pretty much, even though it's going to be short pass game. So I love what he had to say there, and I think he's absolutely right with that. And I think that these guys are going to be up for the task. So we'll see. And then I'm going to move on from the interview section here. I wanted to talk about what are my biggest concerns regarding this Ohio State 2023 football team. So I have 2 concerns on offense and 2 concerns on defense. And, I'm constantly talking to people about Ohio State football, and I noticed that a lot of people have different concerns than me, which is fine. Everybody can have their own concerns. But these are mine, and I want to get into them a little bit. So my number one concern on this whole team is really the quarterback position. I know a lot of people saw what they needed to see from Kyle McCord last game, but to me, I didn't. I keep talking to a friend of mine about this, and he's like, man, you just don't fuck with that dude. I'm like, man, I do, but I got to see something that shows me that we can actually do or have an offense versus a good team, because I think a lot of the plays that we saw last game against Youngstown State are not going to work against good teams. You're not going to get guys breaking tackles on every play. You're not going to throw the ball in the backfield on a swing route and get 15 yards, things like that. Those guys are going to get there and make the tackle. You're going to get 2 yards off of that, and then you're behind the chains. So, again, I'm worried about that position, but I do think that it can be good. I think that Kyle McCord can be really good, especially if he's putting the work in like Emeka Egbuka said he is. So, the second thing on offense that I'm really concerned about is the running scheme. So, a lot of people have been worried about the offensive line. I don't necessarily think they've played bad. I think they've actually been really good in pass protection. And then in the run game, they've been okay, but they're still gelling. They're still, getting used to working with each other. And you have 3 new starters there. But the scheme is what concerns me, because it's another reason why I kind of stood 10 toes on Devin Brown being the quarterback, because the running scheme was a lot more multiple when he was in there. But Kyle McCord's the guy now, so I'm worried about the run scheme, because the first game against Indiana, we were not running the ball very well. And a lot of that had to do with us just simply like we're running stretch to the boundary, which means like the short side of the field. We're not getting guys in space. I expect to see that be different. I want to see more gap schemes. I want to see more getting Travion Henderson in space. I mean, even Chip Trainum, a lot of people want him as running back 1, which is fine if that's your opinion. I think he's a really good back, and I think he's as good as Trey. but he's also really fast. So I know he's big and he can break tackles, but there's nothing wrong with getting him in space also. So I want to see them utilize the scheme of the running game to get guys in space more, instead of just trying to make them run through a wall of defenders. All right, so then moving on to the defense, the two things I'm worried about the most. The first one is going to be, is the secondary really about it? I said before, I think BIA is back. We're going to find out this weekend, and we're going to find out even more in the Notre Dame game. But I mean, it's a concern. It's not necessarily a concern that I'm like, oh, I don't see them being good. But last year we thought a lot of good things were happening on the defense, and then once we played against a better team, it all got exposed at once. Excuse me. So yeah, I again, is the secondary really as improved as we think they are? And then my second one on the defensive side, this one's where I'm going to defer from a lot of people. A lot of people are saying the defensive line's not getting enough pressure. The defensive line's not doing their job. I think the opposite of that. I think that they've been doing phenomenal. They've been doing what they were asked to do, especially given the offense that they've been going against with Youngstown State and Indiana. My concern, and this one really could be the biggest one because I think it could lose Ohio State games against good teams, is how will the linebackers do against teams that want to pass the ball? Obviously, we know that Tommy and Steele are really good linebackers, and they can hold their own against anybody in the run game. They can get to the spot, they can make the tackle. But late in the year last year, they got exposed in the pass game, and that's something that I'm curious to see how Ohio State's going to adjust to that this year. And what's the plan? How do we make it to where Tommy Eichenberg doesn't have to guard a fast receiver down the field? I mean, last year teams were able to expose that, so I'm expecting that to be different this year, especially with some of the different things that Jim Knowles is doing schematically. All right, so that's my concerns. Again, none of those are like set in stone that I think they're going to be like not fixed, but those are the things that I noticed that I think are the main problems with this team right now. And I mean, I like the coaching staff. I think that they can fix it, but they just haven't showed it yet this year. So we'll see how that plays out. The next thing I wanted to get into here, Western Kentucky. So I did a little bit of digging into Western Kentucky stats just to kind of see what to expect. It's not a ton, but it's at least a little bit that uh, makes me at least concerned about our defense. Like I said, I want to see if the secondary is legit. Like Western Kentucky this year so far is averaging 46.5 points per game. Ohio State's averaging 29. I mean, I know Western Kentucky didn't play anybody good, but I don't think Ohio State played anybody really good either. So that they're going to be out there trying to put up some points, and our defense is going to be tested this week. The other thing that I noticed, Western Kentucky allowed 23 points per game so far this year. Now that's where I think Ohio State's going to really exploit them, because Western Kentucky played two really bad teams, and them giving up 23 points per game. Ohio State should be able to score at least 40 in this game, and that's kind of my mark that I'm looking at. I've kind of joked around, but meant it at the same time, that if Ohio State doesn't score at least 40 points in this game, that I'm going to come out on record on my show and predict that Ohio State will lose to Notre Dame. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But I mean, I genuinely feel that way. I think that you have to put up points on teams like this. I mean, we can't just have an offense that doesn't look good and expect to win big games. So we'll see how the offense does against this Western Kentucky defense. Is not very good. A couple other stats that I thought were interesting. Just I look back at last year. Two guys that returned on Western Kentucky's team. Austin Reed, the quarterback, he threw for 4,744 yards last year. 65% completion percentage, which is good. 40 touchdowns. Now he did have 11 interceptions, so there may be an opportunity for Ohio State to create some interceptions in this game, because they're going to be chucking the ball around the field. So, I mean, 4,700 yards and 40 TDs is really good, and I know that a lot of that is from volume, but I mean, there's quarterbacks in the Big Ten who you could put them in the same system and they're not throwing for that many yards, definitely not that many touchdowns, definitely more interceptions. So Austin Reed, I think he's a pretty good quarterback. We'll see how Ohio State deals with him. And then the other player that I wanted to make a note of here was a receiver on Western Kentucky's team. His name is Malachi Corley. Last year, it went for 1,293 yards and 11 touchdowns. I don't know if he's their best receiver because I know he was last year, but I don't know if he's the best receiver because he's not the leading receiver on the team this year so far. But I know that a guy who can put up stats like that can definitely be a problem for any defense. So I'm interested to see if that guy is like one of their main targets. And if he is, I want to see him go against Denzel Burke because I think Denzel Burke's ready to shut down anybody who he plays against this year. All right, so that was it. That segment was short. It was just a little dive into what you can expect to see from Western Kentucky this week. I didn't dive into their defense too much because I think that it's just bad. I think they gave up like 300 rushing yards to one of the teams they played so far. So um, again, I actually get into that here too because I think that Ohio State is going to have a big day rushing, and that's going to lead us into my hot takes for the Western Kentucky game. I think that Travion Henderson is RB1 on this team. Been going back and forth with my buddies in my group chat about it. I think that Trey goes for over 200 yards in this game. I think that they're going to really let him get in a rhythm and not put too much on the quarterback. And I think that Trey will go over 200. So that's my first hot take. My second one is going to be another guy that I've already talked about in the show, G. Scott Jr. Again, I love that kid. I love what he's doing. I love the energy that he brings to the team. He has one touchdown so far as in his Ohio State career. That was last year, and I think that he gets two in this game. I think that Ohio State is going to reward him. Ryan Day seems to be really big this year on this guy deserves. He deserves touches, which I hope that we don't do that against the best teams we play because that's going to get us in trouble. But against a team like Western Kentucky, G. Scott deserves some touches. I think that he gets two touchdowns. The next one, I'm going to switch over to the defensive side of the ball. Actually, the next three that I have are all defensive side of the ball. I'm going to make the prediction that Josh Proctor will get an interception. He didn't play last week because of some injury he had. They said it wasn't a long-term thing. I heard that he is back to practice, and Jim Knowles said that Josh Proctor should be able to work his way back into that starting role. We saw him against Indiana on I think it was a fourth down, make a really nice break on a ball and get a hand on it to get a PBU. I think that it's time for him to get an interception and just put his name out there. I know Josh Proctor's had his issues in the past, but if he's done everything right this time, I think that he's athletic enough where he's going to constantly be having his nose in the play and his hand on the ball. All right, moving on to the next one. The defensive ends is another thing that's been a hot topic this year. I think that it's a deflection. I even said it to, like I said, some of my friends. I think that a lot of people are trying to put pressure and heat on the defensive ends to take pressure off the offense because I think that they've really played well. I think they've done their job. They've been asked to drop in coverage. They've been asked to take on double teams. They've been asked to get after the quarterback very little, but they've done it. They've been asked to really support in the run game. I think this is the game where they're going to kind of reap the rewards of being the guys who are the sacrificial lambs on some plays. I think that they're going to be able to get after the quarterback. And I'm going to say there's 3 sacks from the defensive ends this week. And I'm going to say 2 of them are going to come from JT Tuimoloau. And then my last hot take here is going to be overall about the defense. So I think that our defense is the truth this year. Like I said, even though there was some concerns on that side of the ball, I think that they are actually going to be the truth. I think that Jim Knowles running a scheme where he's not just dialing up constant pressure is really going to help this team, and it's going to allow the playmakers to make plays, which I think is one of the biggest things that's hurt Ohio State, is that we're not allowing playmakers to make plays because you're trying to scheme them up and tell them what to do instead of putting them in a position to make a play. I think that the defense is going to hold Western Kentucky to under 250 passing yards. Now, that doesn't sound like a crazy feat for a normal game, but with a team who runs the style of offense that Western Kentucky does, like I said before, almost 5,000 yards passing last year, that's huge if you can hold them under 250. And I think that we're going to do that, and I think that they don't get over 14 points, which, again, I mean, this team is not just some really good team that we should be worried about. So I think that if we can't hold them under 14 points, that's concerning. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave that at. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up now, though. that was kind of it for my Western Kentucky preview. I'm gonna get more into it tomorrow. My score prediction and also some predictions for other games around the country. As always, leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, and thank you for watching.